The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. And I have news. Gaia just got a whole lot better. They're rolling out a whole new series of member benefits for 2019. Get your first 2 weeks of Gaia for only 99 cents by going to Gaia.com/Jim and signing up. That's Gaia.com/Jim. Thanks, Gaia. The Paranormal Podcast is also brought to you by Parabox Monthly. Parabox Monthly is your source for amazing one-of-a-kind paranormal t-shirts that will lead you into an online paranormal mystery. Check it out at paraboxmonthly.com. Thanks, Parabox Monthly.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you once again. And we have a great double-header show for you today. It's been a while since we've had a back-to-back show, so I thought we would have two guests today, and I think it'll be fantastic. You'll enjoy it. First up will be Bridget Marquardt. You might remember her from that popular series, The Girls Next Door. She was the girlfriend of Hugh Hefner and has gone on to star in her own successful TV series. And she now has her own podcast coming up. It's called Ghost Magnet, and she's going to tell us all about it and her lifelong fascination with the paranormal. That's first up. And then second up is John Olsen. We recorded this late last year, but just haven't gotten a chance to get on the feed. But fascinating discussion of spooky stories from Utah, Stranger Bridgerland. So we thank John for his patience in getting that out. And now we're going to start off with Bridget. And it always amazes me. And know what amazes me? This is what amazes me. How people from different walks of life have an interest in the paranormal, the supernatural, because after all, I think it's something that we can all relate to. The afterlife has a lot of importance to all of us, everybody listening to this. And I'm always amazed when I hear doctors or lawyers or different people who are still interested in this kind of material. And today we have somebody who is a celebrity who is very interested in this material. I'm talking about our guest today, Bridget Marquardt. She has been the star of The Girls Next Door and Travel Channel's Bridget's Sexiest Beaches, but she's had a lifelong passion for the paranormal. Now she is a paranormal investigator, and she's embarking on an exploration of self-described ghost magnets and the spirits, poltergeists, and pukas they attract on her new show, debuting March 11th. It's called Ghost Magnet with Bridget Marquardt. And Bridget, we're so glad to have you on the show, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, people may know you from The Girls Next Door and your involvement with the late Hugh Hefner and so far. That may be what you're best known for, that program. But the paranormal, it sounds like to me that this played a part in your life, and you were interested in this way before Hefner, before all of this celebrity. This is something that you've always been interested in.
Yes, I've always liked, I've always been interested in the paranormal, but I've always loved Halloween and scary movies and the spooky side of everything. And that's from starting as a little girl. And when I was about 12, I think, I started playing with a Ouija board with my cousin. I know. Everybody, as soon as I say that, everybody's like, oh, no. And it truly was a oh, no experience. We felt like we were talking to somebody. But I was accusing her of doing it. She was accusing me of doing it. And so we finally just gave up on it. And I was trying to talk to my great-grandfather who had just passed away. He was the only person at that time that I had known that had died. And supposedly we were talking to him. But then after that, I started having like really bad nightmares about him. And I even thought that I saw him on one occasion, and actually multiple occasions. And things just got really bad after that. And I attribute it to playing to to playing with the Ouija board. And ever since then, I've had like a crazy fascination for the paranormal, and I'm just kind of on a mission. I call myself like a ghost detective. Yes, I do paranormal investigation just on my own and for fun, but I feel like I'm trying to be a detective. I'm trying to put myself in scenarios where other people have experienced things to see if I can experience something. And a lot of places I go, I feel like I do have experiences, but I'm still looking for that. And I think, as everybody is, I'm still looking for that one thing that's going to happen that I'm going to be like, beyond a doubt, that just happened to me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, like the smoking gun. Yeah.
Happen. Everything always seems to happen out of the corner of your eye.
Yeah.
Or when you turn to look, it's gone.
Right.
Or there's because as much as I want to believe, and as much as I do believe, I'm still a skeptic. And every piece of evidence that I get or somebody presents to me, I'm always looking at it with a very critical eye, because I want the truth, you know?
Right. You're open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brains fall out, is what I always say. Now, I'm a believer, but I feel the same way. It's like, let's take just like I don't believe in, debunking every claim out there. And we see that all the time in all kinds of different areas, whether it's ghosts or UFOs or whatever it is. You'll read a story and they'll bring out one of the skeptics, and they'll always say, well, it was this and that. And they don't even know the specifics of the case. Now, that's wrong, but it's also wrong to assume everything is Aunt Millie trying to communicate with me. You've got to try to find and try to substantiate your findings.
Or that every orb is a ghost,
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, that could be a piece of dust. That could be I try to figure out what else it can be.
Now, you mentioned Ouija boards, so since you just mentioned, I'll ask your opinion about it. Different people have different opinions. I've talked to people who say, hey, it's just like any other tool. If you know what you're doing, it's safe. Other people like, I won't touch the things. As of 2019, what does Bridget think about Ouija boards?
Okay, so obviously I was open to it as young, but when I started having those experiences, I was anti the Ouija board after that, scared to death of it. And all of a sudden recently, I've started been thinking, you know what? I don't think it's so bad. I feel like if you aren't open to letting things in, once you're done with it, if you're closed off to things, I think you're okay with it.
Okay.
But that being said, I have not used one since. And every time somebody says, oh, you want to do the Ouija board? I'm like, you guys do the Ouija board.
Well, what's cool about your story is a lot of times, I have to be honest, when you see celebrities getting into certain areas, they're doing that because it's the hot thing. But this seems like for you, this came before the celebrity. This was something that you've always been interested in, and you happen to become a celebrity, and now you're circling back and bringing into your kind of public persona, and really embracing it.
Yeah, I never let it go, and it's not even really circling back. I had it even through Girls Next Door, and we would touch on it a little bit on Girls Next Door, and so yes, before celebrity, before everything, anytime I would travel, I would say, oh, let's stay at a haunted place. If we came to LA, I'd be like, oh, let's stay at the Hollywood Roosevelt or the Queen Mary, and it's haunted. And at night we would go ghost hunting. Just very, we didn't have any tools or anything like that. We just get out after midnight and go walking around on the ship or whatever and try and see if we could find anything or experience anything. And, so I was always into it before that. And then on Girls Next Door, they knew about my love for all of that stuff. And I was actually studying on an online course for my paranormal investigator certificate while I was at the mansion. And we did a couple of episodes about me trying to do a ghost hunt at the Playboy Mansion and having a psychic come in. And we had Barry Taft come in and do an investigation. And so we weren't shy about it. And then also while I was filming Girls Next Door, they contacted me to do an episode of VH1 Celebrity Paranormal Project, which was so much fun. I loved that show. I wish they'd bring it back because I had such a great time going and doing that.
Now I have go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, so we didn't shy away from it. Obviously it wasn't the focus of Girls Next Door at all, but we did bring it into that. And I did take the girls on a ghost adventure with Dearly Departed Tours in LA. We definitely brought it up. And then even on my beaches show, as odd as it may sound, we still did some things that embraced my love for paranormal. We went to the Key West Museum and we saw Robert the doll. Are you familiar with Robert?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I went to visit Robert and I got my picture with him, but don't worry, I asked for permission. And we did a ghost tour in Hawaii with a shaman. And so we actually embraced it even on my beaches show.
Now, I have to ask this. You had a relationship with Hugh Hefner, and obviously a legend in his field and in a household name, really one of the biggest figures in pop culture of the 20th century. And I have to ask, what was his thought about of course, you don't have to share if you don't want to, but if you want to, what were his thoughts on the supernatural and the paranormal? Was he interested? Was he a believer?
You know, Hef loved scary movies. He loved the classic movie monsters. And as far as ghosts and paranormal, he didn't go so far as to say he believed, but he was very supportive of me liking that kind of stuff. And I always say he gave me his little laugh. He has this like little laugh when he's like supportive, but he doesn't totally get it, but he's okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of stuff like that. And when I asked if we could have Barry Taft come and do an investigation and a psychic, he was there and part of the investigation. And he sat down with the psychic and we all held hands and did our whole little seance in there. And when we were going to the Queen, I bring up the Queen Mary again because I just love it, but we went to the Queen Mary for an exhibit. And it was a Marilyn Monroe exhibit. And I asked him if we could spend the night so we could go on a ghost tour that night. And he was totally into it and completely fine with it. So I would say he was a good sport. Whether he's 100% believer, I wouldn't say that, but he was definitely a good sport about it.
Yeah, and that's something. Even if you have somebody that's not a true believer, if at least they're open minded to it, and that's really all you can ask. So this new show, Ghost Magnet, what is the idea behind it? Talk to us about it.
Well, the idea behind it is that because I love it so much, I just want to talk to other people who have had experiences as well. And I mean, you know, so many people have, and I love talking about it and discussing it. So this is just kind of my outlet to go out there and learn about new places, learn about new stories, learn about what other people have experienced. Because the one thing I love to do is to visit these places, especially after I've heard stories, and try and recreate what they experienced. So if they said, oh, I stayed in room 512 and I had this crazy experience in the middle of the night, the faucet turned on or whatever, I want to go stay in room 512 and see if my faucet turns on in the middle of the night. Like I'm just looking for that proof and for that justification. So I just love hearing other people's stories. I love hearing about haunted locations. I like talking to people who have haunted locations. So like, for instance, Mansfield Reformatory reached out to me when I was going to Ohio at one time and said, you have to come here. And I'm so excited when people do that because I want to go. I want to experience it. And I wouldn't even thought to have gone there when I was just going to Ohio for something else, except for they invited me and wanted to share their stories and everything. And I really appreciate that and love it. So this kind of just gives me an avenue to explore that more and to hear more stories and learn about new locations and new things that have happened.
Now, actually, next week on March 11th, the show debuts, and the first episode is going to be on ghosts of the Playboy Mansion, as I understand it.
Yeah, I thought, what better way to start? Because
sure,
that's what people know me mostly from. So we might as well just get right off with it and start talking about my experiences there. And I had an employee come on who's worked there for over 20 years, and he's a good friend of mine. And we just shared stories about the mansion and some of the legends and that kind of thing that we've experienced there or heard about there.
Yeah, I think that's a neat thing. Now, this doesn't have to be specific to the show Ghost Magnet, but what has been the creepiest place you've ever been in terms of paranormal activity, or just a place that felt super creepy?
No, that's so easy for me. Myrtle's Plantation.
Tell us what happened.
Do you know about Myrtle's Plantation?
Yeah, sure do.
In New Orleans, well, not in New Orleans, but in Louisiana and St. Francisville. Well, okay, so I had read the book about it, and I've seen little documentaries about it, and I've been so fascinated by Myrtle's Plantation for I mean, years and years and years. And finally, just like 2 years ago, I finally got to go for the first time. And my fiance and I went. And for the record, my fiance is a super skeptic. And before me, he wasn't even into ghosts. Like when I first told him that I love paranormal ghosts, he just looked at me like I was, oh, like he's just okay, whatever, you know. But I've made him stay at so many haunted places and go on so many ghost hunts with me. And he is a true sport, a true trooper about it. And he keeps me in line though. Like if he thinks something is weird or somebody's telling stories or whatever, he'll like nudge me and give me the eye or whatever. But he for my birthday, he took me to the Myrtles plantation. And I was so excited. I felt like I knew everything about this place. I mean, the book talks about what the doorknobs are made of and what's behind drapes and things like that. So I felt like I just knew everything about it. And when we got there, I was sort of thrown off because it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, which I just thought was so weird because of how much I had read and viewed about this mansion. But anyway, we get there, we check in. We had rented out the room that actually has the staircase and the haunted mirror, the main entryway. Nobody else has access to that except for when they do tours during the day. But at night, it's kind of like on lockdown. You're not allowed to go in any part of the house, which I thought was weird because I thought it was going to be sort of like a bed and breakfast. But so luckily we had the room that had the haunted stairs and the entryway, the mirror, and this huge sitting room upstairs and a gigantic room. And that was all ours for the whole night. Nobody else was allowed in there. And what's kind of creepy is they give you this book and they say, nobody's here at night. So if there's an emergency, here's an emergency number to call. I was like, uh-oh, do we need this? But, so we're ghost hunting and we have all my equipment out. I don't have a ton of equipment, but I have like K2 meters and voice recorder and just different things like that. And I'm staying on the 17th step where somebody supposedly died.
Ooh.
I'm asking questions and stuff, and it's like midnight, 12:30, something like that. And my fiance is with the EMF meter, and he's like putting it around the mirror and taking pictures of the mirror, getting different angles, and trying to see if anything happens with the EMF. We were getting absolutely nothing, and I don't know why I started getting this like terrible headache, and which was awful because I wanted to just stay up all night and enjoy the experience of being at the Myrtles plantation. And finally, around 1:30, 2 o'clock, we were like, well, we're just not getting anything. I mean, nothing at all. The K2 meter wasn't even, we had to like keep checking it to make sure that it was on and that the batteries were working because it would, I mean, just not even a blink on it. So finally, we were like, oh, let's just go to bed. So we're sitting in bed, and there's no TVs in there. So we were just sitting in bed using the iPad playing games until we finally fell asleep. And we're asleep, and all of a sudden we hear like some running up the stairs right outside our room. And we sat up and I'm like, did you hear that? Yeah, I heard that. Well, we're the only ones in this whole area of the house. So we open up the door and we look down and nobody's out there. Okay, well, that was kind of weird. I wonder if that was something. So then we go back to bed, and then it sounds like, and we're on the top floor, but it sounds like above us that like furniture is being pushed around and that kind of thing. And we're laying in bed in the dark, and I said, did you hear that? And he's like, yeah, I heard that. And then we hear like little kids running and laughing. And I'm like, did you hear that? And he's like, yeah, I heard that. And the whole time we were there, we never even saw any kids there. I mean, not that they weren't, but we never saw any kids. And so all this noise is going on, and there just felt like there was this heavy presence in the room. And by this time, my headache is just splitting. And I felt like there was a smell in the room, almost like a really bad carpet or something, or a brand new carpet that just had this like odor that was giving me a terrible headache. And so it didn't make me feel like just jumping up and investigating like I normally would. I just wanted to like fall asleep because I was hurting so bad. And anyway, the sounds were getting crazy, and then all of a sudden we started hearing this electronic noise in our room, and we both sit up and we were like, what was that? and my K2 meter was just flipping out. I mean, it was going all the way to red and then turning off and going all the way to red and turning off. But I mean, just like, and he's like, your K2 meter's making noises. I'm like, that, it doesn't make noise. It's a silent K2 meter. And we're looking around, just the feeling of heaviness, like something was in the room. And he was like, and I'm like, what time is it? And he said, it was 3:12. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the worst time to be up. And I just wanted to like go underneath the covers. I mean, it was so scary. And the pressure was so heavy in the room. Like I just felt like at any moment that I was going to see someone in our room standing over us or something. It was just that heavy and that strong. And even my fiance was like, we were just white knuckled on each other, going, did you hear that? Did you hear that? And then all of a sudden I just felt the room lighten up and it was over. And I was like, what time? I think it's over. Do you feel that? Like it just felt like a huge relief happened. And I'm like, what time is it? And it was 4:17. So for like an hour between 3 and 4, like they say, that's the craziest hour. But like clockwork, it was just like the whole place went nuts. And the next morning at 7 a.m., they do biscuits down in the gift shop. So I wasn't about to miss that. So we go down there and now my headache's starting to go away. And the guys that are working down there, they were like, oh, so what room did you stay in? And we're like, and we told them what room and they were like, oh, you guys made it through the night? The last 2 people to stay in there left in the middle of the night.
Oh,
and
man.
then there was a group of people having breakfast that also stayed at the hotel, and they were like, were you guys moving furniture around last night up there? And we were like, no, that was not us.
Wow. Wow, that's quite an experience.
It was the most experience that I've ever experienced, seriously. And then my headache was going away. And the reason I bring the headache up at all is because I really felt like that was part of the paranormal experience. Like I looking back on it, I sort of feel like it was trying to sort of incapacitate me so that I wasn't willing to just jump up and run around with my meters and stuff and look at things. Like I was really that sick. Like I was to the point of nauseous from the headache. And I just feel like it was part of the haunting of some sort, or the experience.
Do you think that you are a sensitive?
I do think I'm sensitive, and Barry Taft told me that I'm a conduit, that the reason that things happen to me so often or that I have experiences is because they're coming through me, because I'm open to that kind of thing. So, yeah, I definitely think I'm sensitive. I mean, not as sensitive as some. I don't go in and go, oh my gosh, this happened in this room and I can feel it. But I can walk in and say, this room doesn't feel right. Like I sense something in here,
So it sounds like you're a ghost magnet.
Yes.
There you go.
So that's why the title of the show.
Now, after the break, we're going to talk more about ghosts. But before we go to the break, tell folks when and where they can find the show. We'll tell them again at the end, but I want to tell them a couple times so they don't miss it.
Okay, it's premiering on March 11th, and it's on Spotify and iTunes. Ghost Magnet.
Very, very cool. We'll be back with Bridget Marquardt right after this on the Paranormal Podcast. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to empowering the evolution of consciousness. Now, I've been telling you for years how great Gaia is, but Gaia has just gotten a whole lot better. Now, Gaia remains a video streaming service for people like us who love the Fortean, the metaphysical, the unexplained. But Gaia has upped its game, yes indeed. First, there's all new shows and all new seasons for 2019. Also, there's Gaia's live stream access to watch and participate in events from anywhere in the world. Now, a couple weeks back, they were covering the 17th annual Conscious Life Expo, which, get this, Gaia annual members could actually watch live, and the archive remains for them on demand. Plus, Gaia is rolling out all new member benefits, including discounted tickets to live events, workshops, and exclusive interviews. The great thing is, whatever your device, Gaia has an app. You can watch Gaia on all of your devices: Android, iPhone, Apple TV, your iPad, your Fire TV, your Roku, your computer. If you're listening to this podcast, you can indeed watch Gaia. Now, Gaia has a community of over 500,000 members, and it's growing each and every day. Here's some of the great programming that you're missing out on if you're not a member. Mystery Teachings with Teresa Bullard. She says we are all connected, not just as a collective on Earth, but as a collective throughout the galaxy. Now, this means that everything we do sends ripples across the universe for better or worse. So join Teresa as she explores definitions of life from scientific and metaphysical perspectives. Very, very interesting. Becoming galactic. Fascinating stuff. Or Demanhur, Journey Through Time. Join Cretolo Sesamo, and Cretolo introduces us to the geography of time, which is not the smooth-flowing steady state that we experience. It includes ways that time fluctuate at different speeds, encounter vortexes, islands, and even fractions. And I've always thought that time is maybe the key to the mysteries that we examine on these programs. So looking forward to that one, the geography of time. Now, that's just a smidgen of what you get with Gaia, and you can't get it anywhere else, and you can't get it unless you are a member. So let's fix this. Don't miss out. Go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim. Now, over there, we picked a few shows, a few videos that you can watch, and you don't have to log in or give your email address or anything, just to give you a little taste of what Gaia is all about. And you'll see guests like Lauren Coleman, John D'Souza, and more. And I think that's so cool that Gaia did that for us. Once you see those videos, you're going to say, you know, Jim is right. This Gaia, it is fantastic. He's not kidding. It's user-supported, it's 100% ad-free, and it's absolutely worth 99 cents to try it out for 2 weeks, or become an annual member for even more benefits. So please navigate over to Gaia.com/Jim today. Check out those shows and then sign up with that great deal. Go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. I love it. You'll love it. Thanks, Gaia. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest today is Bridget Marquardt. She is the star of the new show, Ghost Magnet with Bridget Marquardt, and we're so glad to have her on. I was telling Bridget before we hit record, my wife used to watch The Girls Next Door. Dar Harold, you may know her from our podcast that we do together, Soulmate Stories. By the way, check that one out. That's true love stories, and we really enjoy it. But anyway, Dar was saying that Bridget was always her favorite on that program. So it was kind of like synchronicity that we ended up connected and got to interview you for this show. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's so sweet.
So I want to ask you, have you ever seen a full body apparition?
Well, like I said, when I was playing with the Ouija board, after that, I had seen what I thought was my great-grandfather. And this weird thing happened. I got home from school, was home by myself, came in through the back door. The back door flew open, and I went over there, and I was like, oh, that's weird, and shut it. Went back to whatever I was doing, homework in the living room, and I heard the back door fly open again. I'm like, what the heck? I go back over there, close the door, make sure it's good and tight, and then go back into the living room, and I hear it fly open again. And this time I'm like, what is going on with the door? I go back in there it's through the laundry room that I have to go, and I go to shut the door, and I lock it this time, and as I turn, I see sitting on the laundry basket an apparition that looks like my passed away great-grandfather.
Wow.
And it's one of those things, like I said, for me anyway, it's always out of the corner of my eye. And I turned to look straight on, and it was gone. But it was clearly something that resembled my grandfather. I mean, looking back on it now, I don't think it was. But at that time, I thought for sure it was. It looked like him. What else could it be? But now I think it was just a trick. I just don't think it was him, because the feeling that I got from this and the things that happened after that, which were like nightmares or feeling like somebody was watching me or always near me, were not positive signs. They weren't things like a guardian angel or anything like that. They felt more sinister than that. And I don't think that was him at all. And then one other time, actually, I have one other experience, but I'm going to save it because it's on my premiere episode of my show, so I'll save that. But there was something that happened at the Playboy Mansion that you might want to hear about.
Ooh.
Yes. Teasing.
Yes, we will have to tune in to see that. Now, let me ask you this. You mentioned that you thought that your grandfather, that was a trick. And I actually, I as we're talking, I write down little bullet points. And people who investigate the paranormal, I always ask them this question: do you think there's a trickster element to all of this? Not saying it's all, somebody playing tricks on it, but do you think that's a part of it?
I think there's lots of parts to it. I think that after playing with the Ouija board, that you can be tricked, that it's not who you think it is that you're speaking to. I say this based on just the couple of times I played with my cousin at 12 years old, but I think that we were tricked into who we thought we were talking to, and it wasn't. And whatever I saw and was feeling had nothing to do with my grandfather whatsoever. But tried to play it off as if it was my great grandfather. So in that aspect, yes, I think it's tricking. I also think that, now, I'm a believer, even though I'm a skeptic, I'm a believer in the paranormal, don't get me wrong, but I also think that your mind can play a lot of tricks on you, and especially when you're like 12 or 13. For some reason, I've talked to so many people about my experiences when I was younger, and a lot of people tell me that for some reason, and especially with girls, in that preteen, teen age right there, the mind really plays a lot of tricks with you, and a lot of girls at that age experience things that might not necessarily be paranormal, but are more, I don't even know how they explain it, but they just say that a lot of girls at that age experience things. So I think it has something to do, I think your mind can play a lot of tricks on you sometimes. So that's why I want to be really careful about saying everything is paranormal. Like, that's why I'm looking for the proof. I don't want it to be my mind just playing tricks on me. I don't want it to be the power of suggestion. I don't want it to be, dust particles that people are calling, ghostly orbs and that kind of thing. I want to make sure it is what I'm seeing and feeling.
Now, what do you think ghosts are? I mean, do you think that they're sometimes a trick, like you mentioned, sometimes dearly departed loved ones? Do you think that they're kind of a replay of things of the past, like a tape that's not quite erased? Or do you think it's kind of all of the above and more?
I really think it's all of the above. I think there's definitely residual ghost activity, paranormal activity that happens. I mean, when somebody always sees something or feels something on a certain staircase or whatever, I don't believe that that person is actively walking up and down that staircase eternally trying to do that. I think that that's residual. But I also feel like people get messages from loved ones or visited by loved ones to help them through hard times, or things like that, or maybe even, I don't want to say trapped, but possibly and that can come through too. Like, I have a friend who's he was out of the country, and his mom came to him and said, everything's going to be okay. And 2 seconds later, he found out that she had died. And so I think that they can come to you for certain messages like that, as well as the residual energy that just goes up and down a staircase or whatever. And then, but who knows? That's one of the reasons I want to do the show. I want to hear other people's stories, other people's thoughts and opinions on things, and in my quest for the truth.
There you have it. Now, you talked about equipment earlier. Now, some people are all about the gear, right? They're all about the tech.
Yeah.
And then some people are more minimalists. Maybe they use a thing or two. Where do you fall, and what tech do you like to use when you go on an investigation?
Well, for my personal stuff, I have a very small kit. So I have a couple of EMF meters, a laser thermometer, a voice recorder. I usually bring a digital camera, but a lot of times I just do things on my phone. And then I have some motion detectors. Am I forgetting anything in my personal? That's really it. That I have in my personal stuff. I really like to be in the moment, and I like to experience it, but I also like to have some sort of proof or some sort of sign that something's going on. Because if you're not having a feeling of something, that doesn't necessarily mean nothing's happening. So if you have a K2 meter that, say, lights up, which mine does, then that gives me like some incentive to keep going. There's something going on here, and I want to explore more. Now, I've done investigations with like Calaveras Paranormal team, and they had, I swear when I walked into the place, I thought it was it was ghost hunters were set up in there. They were so professional. They had cameras in all of the rooms. They had huge monitors with all the different cameras up on the screen. They had somebody that was manning that the whole entire time. They had the what do you call it? Is it the SLS camera with the stick figures?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was so much fun to use. Now, I don't know what the science is behind that, but it was fun. It was really fun to use and quite scary when you're walking. We were in a costume store that used to be a funeral home with its own crematorium.
Ooh.
And as we were getting close to we were in the crematorium room. And as you're getting close to where, my brother's a mortician, so he says it's called the retort, where that's the like burning chamber, where the retort used to be. It's gone now, but you can see the exhaust hole in the ceiling. And I brought my brother with us since he's a mortician. And, there was a stick figure peeking out behind the costumes that were right there. And like when you ask them to engage, sometimes they will. They will. When you say come out, he like stepped out a little bit.
Oh man.
Into the aisle. Or if you say to wave or sometimes they will. So I do not know. I don't pretend to know what the science is behind that camera, but it was pretty crazy.
Yeah. That is looking out behind the costumes and the crematorium there. That's certainly a little creepy. Now,
yeah, it was really fun. Oh, you know what else they had too? They had the boxes where, you go in between the radio stations and you get
like a Frank's box.
Yes. And then we actually, so this is not the same grandfather I'm talking about when I was little, but my actual grandfather, that was my great grandfather, passed away when I was doing the Ouija board thing, but my grandfather passed away around a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at this location, it was back home, which is Northern California for me. And I was home for his funeral. He had died a few months back, but we were having the funeral, a few months later.
Sure.
And I was home for his funeral, and he had been sick for a long time, and we had a pact that he knew how much I loved the paranormal and all that kind of stuff. So we had a pact that when he passed away, if he could, he would give me some sort of sign. And I don't know that I've necessarily gotten a sign from him yet, which also makes me very skeptical in things. But then I also think maybe some people just passed and don't look back. But with that box, we did ask if my grandfather was there, and in a voice that sounded very distinctly like his voice, it said, "I'm still here." And we have it on a record.
Oh man.
We have it recorded. And it was so crazy. Just that direct response like that.
Well, it's interesting.
So I think equipment is really fun.
Now, the thing I was going to say, though, just because you don't get a response immediately after somebody passes, I don't think it necessarily means that all is lost. Because I had an instance where I got a sign from my uncle who had been like a second dad to me. And that took, that would have been, 27, it took about 4.5 years after he passed, really? But I thought it was a very distinct sign, but it was one of those eerie synchronicity type things. But it took 4.5 years. So I think, and I also wonder how difficult it is for them to communicate, and maybe it's not the easiest thing.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I also feel like some people maybe, like my friend always tells me, well, you don't want to hear from them. It's a good sign if you don't. That means they've passed on and they've made it to wherever is next, and they're busy doing their own thing, and they're not like stuck here.
Yeah.
And I like to believe that that's true too. But yeah, I was sort of disappointed that I hadn't gotten any, and we had like an actual code too. Not only was he supposed to say "I'm still here," which that recording got, but I tried to ask for what our secret like password thing was, and I didn't get that out of it. But it's good to know. Maybe I won't give up on him yet. Maybe he'll still give me a sign.
And I think that's that idea of having a secret password, that's pretty cool. I mean, I hate to be morbid, but I ought to set that up with my loved ones and say, hey, if you hear this word, it's me.
Yes.
Yeah. It's been such a lot of fun to speak with you. And this show, Ghost Magnet, it sounds like you had a lot of fun doing it so far.
Oh yeah, I have. It's been great.
So let's recap. Ghost Magnet with Bridget Marquardt debuting. I can't say that word today for some reason. Debuting. I don't know why. Debuting March 11th on Spotify and iTunes. Give everybody the information one more time.
Ghost Magnet is premiering March 11th on Spotify and iTunes. And we are going to talk to people about their experiences, not only people, celebrities, and locations.
Very, very cool. Well, our guest has been Bridget Marquardt. The show is Ghost Magnet, and I'll be checking it out, and you should too. We thank her so much for her time. Bridget, thank you for being a part of the Paranormal Podcast today.
Thanks so much, Jim.
Well, it was great to get to meet Bridget and talk to her about her new podcast, Ghost Magnet. Do check it out when it comes out next week. And next up, we're going to talk to John Olsen about Stranger Bridgerland right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Parabox Monthly. Every paranormal enthusiast will love Parabox Monthly. Parabox Monthly is a t-shirt subscription box that delivers soft-style paranormal-themed t-shirts to your home every month. You're never locked in, and you can cancel at any time. But wait, Parabox isn't just about the amazing one-of-a-kind shirts. No! Every tee has a hidden password somewhere embedded into the design. And I got to tell you, the artwork is fantastic. I've worked with the artist behind Parabox, and he's just extremely, extremely talented. Wait till you see these shirts. Again, every tee has a hidden password somewhere embedded into the design. Find the password and input it on their website, and you're on to their next puzzle. Correct entries are entered into a monthly drawing for free merchandise. So, if you're into ghosts and haunted locations, UFOs and aliens, cryptids, urban legends, and other head-scratchers, what are you waiting for? Head on over to paraboxmonthly.com and get started. You'll love the tea and get lost in the mystery and the clues. And be sure to use the promo code JIM20, that's JIM, the number 2 and the number 0 for 20% off your first month. Again, if you're a paranormal enthusiast like me, Parabox Monthly is going to be right up your alley. You're really going to enjoy it. No purchase necessary for the drawing, by the way. Thanks so much, Parabox Monthly.
Now back to the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
If you've never been to Utah, you need to go because it is just a beautiful, beautiful state, beautiful wilderness, beautiful mountains. But not only is there beauty, there's some strangeness going on. And we have a great guest to talk about that strangeness of the supernatural sense. He's written a book. It's called Stranger Bridgerland, True Paranormal Stories from Northern Utah. Strange Utah Volume 1. We're talking about John Olsen, and we're so glad to have him with us. He lives in beautiful northern Utah. He resides on the far north sides of the Cache Valley in Lewiston with his wife and 3 kids. He enjoys the outdoors and spending time with his family, and he was born and raised in that area. And at the age of 8, he began to realize that the home he lived in was peculiar. And we're going to talk to him about that. But over the years, with various experiences, his interest in the paranormal grew, and now he is telling his stories and the stories of others in northern Utah in his book, Stranger Bridgerland. John, welcome to the program today.
Jim, thanks so much for having me on. This is great. I appreciate it.
So let me ask you, it sounds like all of this started for you at a very young age. What happened?
So the home that I grew up in was over 100 years old. It was built in the mid-1880s. And it wasn't long, like you said, around age 8, I started noticing that there were things in my house that was not like my friends' houses. And some of the experiences we were having in there. I have an older sister. She's 4 years older than me, and a younger brother. He's about a year younger than me. And we started talking about some of the strange things that were going on in our home. There were footsteps in the hallway, voices. We had things disappearing, just all kinds of strange things going on. And as we started talking about it, my parents were very adamant that we not tell anybody that our house was haunted, just for fear of people talking about us and thinking that we were weird. So for a long time, until I was a teenager, I just read everything I could. I watched everything I could about the paranormal and learned, just everything I could, just because of how curious I was about the strange things going on in my house.
And it seems like a normal curiosity. Now, you talked about the man with the hat. Who was the man with the hat?
So one experience that I had is when I was around 11 years old. I came home from school. It's the middle of the day. Grabbed a snack. I went into our front room and sat on the couch to get ready to watch some television and just relax from the day. And I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. And I turned, and here, standing in the doorway to the front room, is this figure of a gentleman, very tall, with a wide-brimmed hat. He had overalls on and a white shirt, but I could see through him, and I couldn't see his face. I couldn't see what he looked like in the face. And I kind of froze. He walked into the front room and then sat in the rocking chair that was just adjacent from me. And he and the rocking chair started rocking back and forth. And I closed my eyes and counted to 10 because I was just really kind of freaked out at the time. And I opened my eyes and he was gone. The rocking chair continued to rock back and forth a little bit and then stop. And that was the first time I actually saw a figure in the home. Later on, I would find out that other people, my mother had seen him several times in the house, and my sister had seen him a couple times in the house. And with everything going on, that was the first time I'd actually seen an apparition of an actual ghost in the home.
Yeah, that's that's a terrifying thing for a kid, and there's so many reports of ghosts or shadow people or those kind of things with hats that are interesting. Now, I do want to get on to some of the other stories, but I am fascinated about your house. What do you think the genesis of this haunting was? What do you think kind of created it, or do you have any theories?
I do, yeah. I kind of going through, I kind of figured there's got to be about 3 different individuals that reside in the house. There's the man with the hat, and I don't know if it's him or a different entity that I kind of refer to as the trickster, the one that really likes to play games and kind of focus on people, especially people who may be more susceptible to the things. My son, in particular, my oldest son, the ghosts seem to really focus on him because I think it knew it really bothered him. And just for example, about 5 years ago, my son was over helping Grandpa paint the basement. And my mother, for a very long time, had this snowman that she'd purchased. It was about 3.5, 4 feet tall. It was made out of cloth and had a sandbag base, so it was really hard to move. And she would have that upstairs during Christmas time, and it had a tendency to move a lot at night. And my son really did not like that thing. And in the summertime, it would go down in the basement into storage. Well, my son was over helping Grandpa. He was painting the hallway into the basement, and there's only one way in or out of the basement. And my son had his headphones on, and he said he got a really creepy feeling, and he looked into the room, and the snowman is in the corner, turned around facing towards him. And so he went in and muscled the snowman around to face the corner. Again, he didn't like the snowman, and went in the hallway and put his headphones on and started painting again. And about 15 minutes later, he started getting a really creepy feeling again. So he said he peeked his head around the corner into the room, and not only had the snowman turned around, but now it was halfway across the room towards him. So he put down the paint and went upstairs and told Grandpa he was not going to paint unless they got rid of that snowman. And so he went out, the snowman went out on the porch and was out there for several years until my mother got rid of it. But so yeah, there's the man with the hat. There's a trickster one that likes to play tricks on people. And then I think there's a lot of residual where there's footsteps and running up and down the main staircase that you can hear quite a bit. But I've had all kinds of experiences in the home, and so has my children as they've grown up and spent time at Grandma and Grandpa's house. And my parents had quite a bit of experiences there as well. It wasn't until I was much older before they started sharing their experiences that they had because they didn't want us kids to be afraid. But it's really quite an active home. It'll go, a couple months and nothing will happen, and then there'll be a week where it's just really kind of crazy, the stuff going on there. But yeah, growing up there was definitely quite an experience.
So this kind of informed your whole interest in this, and then you found that that northern Utah in general had a lot of activity. Talk to us about that. How did you start to put together the pieces that that there was something going on that was not just one home, but it was widespread?
Well, as I mentioned before, my parents didn't like us talking about the house being haunted. So it wasn't until I was a teenager and I started having friends over to the house, they actually started having experiences too. I remember I was upstairs in my room with one of my friends. We were studying for school, and all of a sudden she kind of threw her book down on the floor and was staring at me, and I looked up and I'm like, what's going on? And she looks at me and she goes, what's going on? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And she says, well, we've been up here for about a half an hour, and 3 times somebody has walked up and down your stairs right here, but there's nobody on your stairs. And I said, well, I kind of had to confess that my house was haunted. And I told her a few stories. And it wasn't long before, when we were out, all of us on double dates or at a party, that people started saying, oh, hey, did you guys know that John's house is haunted? He needs to tell us some stories. And so I got comfortable sharing my experiences in the groups and stuff. And people started coming to me later on with their own stories. And so by the time I was about 17, 18, when somebody would come to me with their story, I would tell them, hey, let me interview you. Let me write this down. Someday I want to write a book. Would you be okay with me sharing this? And that's kind of how it started. And for the longest time, it was just word of mouth, where people would hear that I interview people and that I've had experiences, and they would come to me and let me interview them. And some of them were okay with me sharing the stories. Some of them not. Some of them a lot of them wanted their name changed so that people didn't know it was exactly them that did it. But it was at an early age, 17 or 18, I just started interviewing people and collecting stories. And as I lived in northern Utah, that's where the vast majority of the first bunch of stories came from, here in northern Utah. And it varied. The stories that people would bring to me, Bigfoot stories, UFO stories, cryptids, glitches in the matrix. And because I didn't necessarily narrow myself down to one genre, just opened it up to paranormal in general, it just helped me gather a lot of different stories from northern Utah.
You're kind of like me. You're interested in all of it. You know, some people are ghost people. Some people are UFO people. Some are cryptid people. And then there's people like us who are interested in all of it. And I love that perspective, because it's kind of, I think it's all fascinating. And in some cases, maybe some of it is tied together. And since I brought that up, I'll ask you, do you feel that there's any connection to these kind of different silos of, I guess we would call it, anomalous activity?
I think there could be. Yeah, I think there definitely could be. like you say, I just love all things paranormal. And when I delved into it as a child reading, I don't know if you remember that the Time Life books came out
yes.
with this series. And when my little local library got those, I just read all of them front to back over and over and over again. And that they dealt with everything. And so, yeah, I definitely think there's a connection through all of it somehow. I'm not sure how, but just I think it has a lot to do with our just something deep in the core of humanity that makes us want to explore the unexplored. So
between that book series and In Search Of, I think that both of those things together inspired a whole generation of paranormal researchers, investigators, podcasters, radio hosts.
Mm-hmm.
I think really those two things kind of just spurred a lot of us on in our youth to find out more about this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other one I was going to mention too, is the In Search Of, the good old In Search Of.
The funny thing is that Leonard Nimoy is most known for Star Trek, but he may have impacted people in a deeper level with In Search Of, and that kind of gets lost in the mix. It's just really interesting. That was my first indoctrination to all of this. Well, we are talking to John Olsen. We're talking about his book, Stranger Bridgerland, and we'll be back right after this on the Paranormal Podcast.
Would you love to access all of Jim's shows in a single handy-dandy app for your iPhone or tablet? Go to the App Store for your Apple, Android, or Amazon device and download Jim Harold's Spooky Studio app for free. Do it today.
We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is John Olsen. We're talking about Stranger Bridgerland, his compilation of spooky stories from northern Utah. And what I thought we might do, John, is maybe just touch on some of the different categories. We talked about the diversity of the things that you're looking at. And the one here that caught my interest was Chapter 5, La Plata. What is La Plata?
So, La Plata is a ghost town here in northern Utah. It's on the south end, up in the mountains of Cache Valley. And it was a silver mining town. And that's one good thing about Utah and the West, is there's actually a lot of places where they had these boom towns, and then when the silver or the gold ran out, the towns crashed and people left. But in a lot of cases, there's still some buildings or some just the foundations. And this one happens to be, like I said, in northern Utah on the southern end of Cache Valley. And this gentleman that I had interviewed, him and his friends were in the early 80s. They'd heard about it, late 80s, early 90s. And they'd heard about it, and they wanted to go up there just to go explore. And so they went on a hike up there and camp, and they camped just outside of the La Plata up there. And in the middle of the night, they woke up to the sound of piano playing and what sounded like a party. And they got up, and they could hear it coming from what used to be the main street there, from one of the buildings that was no longer there. And so they snuck down closer and closer, and they got to the point where his friend didn't want to go any further. But he was really interested, and even though it was really scary, he was really curious where this sound was coming from. And he got closer and closer to the building, and he could hear people talking and laughing, and just the sounds that you would hear coming out of a saloon from way back in the day. And interesting enough, just as he's getting close to it, he trips on something and falls. And as he hits the ground, it goes dead silent. And they can't hear anything. And it really kind of, he was really very excited about it, that he had this experience. And they went back to camp and didn't have any other experiences that night. But it was just kind of amazing to him, because it felt like to him that he was almost hearing through time back to another time of all of the saloon and the piano and the clinking of glasses and just everything. He was excited but scared all at the same time about it.
I love stories like that. What do you think is behind those kind of stories? We hear them in different settings. What do you think's going on?
I don't know. When it's an instant like that, I'm wondering if it's not just like a recording of something that has happened a long time ago, a psychic recording, whether it's done, Utah's got a lot of the granite stone. Sure. And there's a belief that can hold a lot of psychic energy. I'm not sure if that's how it is, but where it sounds of the piano and sounds of a party, I tend to think more of you're hearing maybe even a hole back through time. It's hard to tell. Not so much a ghost, somebody who's there partying in the afterlife, but more of a recording of what has happened in the past. I think there's a little bit different between an interactive ghost type situation where you may have an entity that's reacting to you, and other things like maybe footsteps and stuff that's like a track through time that you hear over and over again.
And that's what I was going to ask you about. Sometimes I think when the general public, people who aren't into this stuff, think about hauntings or ghosts, that there's just one kind of ghost. But it seems like the more you get into it, there are different kinds of hauntings, different kinds of manifestations, different kinds of ghosts, aren't there?
There are, yeah. I found all kinds of, some of the ones that I've noticed is intelligent hauntings. That's like, for example, the ghost that likes to play tricks on people in my family. Then residuals like that party, or footsteps could be a residual kind of thing where you're hearing something from the past. There's poltergeist, which is, it's basically German for noisy ghost is the translation, but that's where things can get moved or thrown or something like that. And then you get into the more of the darker side of the inhuman ghosts, or where people may have interacted with demons or stuff like that. I tend to shy away from that. Not that I don't have stories of Ouija boards and stuff like that. I tend, just as a personal note, I try not to steer people in that direction, just to be safe, if that makes sense.
Do you still see ghosts to this day?
I have, at my parents' house, I have. I don't know, I've had people ask me if they think I'm sensitive or what, and I'm not sure if you would call it that, but I have, just because maybe that's where I was raised, that I might just be sensitive to being able to see that. I'm not sure. So I know that some people tend to see more than others, and so it's possible.
Well, it's one of those things where I do believe some people are more sensitive than others. I definitely think that is that. Now, have you built up a tolerance over the years? Do these things sometimes still scare you, or you've seen it all, so you're kind of oblivious to it? It doesn't faze you much.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I think I have built up kind of a tolerance. I think I still get excited by it, but it doesn't frighten me. I'll share an experience I had that kind of reiterates that. A couple of years ago, my parents were gone on vacation. And when my parents are gone on vacation, it seems to stir things up at the house. But they asked me if I wanted to just come over and house sit for a couple of days. And so I actually took my youngest son, and he was 8 at the time. And we went over to the house, and we were spending the night. We watched a movie and stayed up kind of late, and around 11 o'clock he'd fallen asleep. So I carried him upstairs. We were sleeping upstairs at the time. I carried him upstairs and put him to bed. And my mother has a little Shih Tzu dog, and his name is Bassa. He usually sleeps with my parents or sleeps with whoever's staying the night. And so I went down into the kitchen. He has a little bassinet, and he was laying in there. And I asked him if he wanted to go to bed, and he just kind of raised his eye and went back to sleep. And so I left Bassa in the kitchen, and I went upstairs to bed. And around 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to just a horrible banging noise and the dogs barking. And so I walked downstairs, and as I hit the bottom of the stair, right before you can turn into to see into the kitchen, the noise stopped. And Bassa barked a couple times, and then it went quiet. And I walked down and turned the light in the kitchen on, and then I could see what the noise had been, because every cupboard in the kitchen was at a different level of open. And so I realized that the drawers and all of the cupboards had been slamming. That's what the banging I could hear was, all the cupboards slamming. And Bassa was up underneath the kitchen table, just shaking, scared to death. So I picked up Bassa, and I shut all the drawers and checked the door to make sure it was still locked. Everything was locked, and just went upstairs and went back to sleep. Because, like I said, that kind of stuff happens, and it doesn't scare me. And I know a lot of people that I've told that story, they're like, how could you just go back to sleep? But I know that there's no malice necessarily involved with that. So, yeah, it's interesting that something that major would not frighten me, if that makes sense.
Now, Bigfoot. We have to talk about Bigfoot. You have multiple chapters in here. Now, this one looks interesting. Bigfoot up left hand. Tell us about left hand and what was Bigfoot doing there?
So, interesting enough, left hand has been kind of, it's a mountain, or it's up in the mountains just east of Cache Valley here, and there's it's kind of a major canyon. There's left hand and right hand, and they meet each other. And I've actually had a lot of people tell me experiences that they've had of the paranormal and Bigfoot in that area. This was a story of a gentleman. He was going to school at the time at Utah State University, and him and his friends went camping up there. And they set up camp, and he went fishing, and they were having a good time. And they started hearing some really strange sounds coming from the mountains, sounds that he'd never heard before, kind of like screamings, and he was at the time unaware of Bigfoot necessarily. And they just had some very weird experiences with brush being shaken and yelling. And at one point, they were right next to a big beaver pond, is where they had camped, and they something threw a great big boulder right in the middle of it, in the middle of their of the night in the camp, that woke them up and got them all excited about it. They finally, when they did go back, they finally did get to sleep, and in the morning he went out, as he wanted to go fishing. He was the only one that was a fisherman. So just at daybreak, he went out fishing and saw the Sasquatch just at the ridge line running through the trees as he was fishing in the morning. So it was not only just one little sighting for them, but activity through the night, and he got to see it as it ran away up through there. So it was kind of a really exciting thing for him, and it actually got this gentleman very excited about Bigfoot. And later on in life, he ended up living in the Northwest, which got him even more excited about Bigfoot. But there's quite a few sightings of Bigfoot in northern Utah throughout.
And then it's not only Bigfoot, but I'm fascinated by this topic. I have to ask about this one. I served a time traveler.
Oh, yes. That's one of my favorite stories, actually. This individual came to me, and they'd heard that I write stories about the paranormal, and they came to me and said, I had an experience that doesn't fall under ghosts or anything like that, but here in Cache Valley, it's just like a lot of Utah. It's a fairly Mormon state, as you may know. And back in the day, in the early 80s, early 90s, not a lot of things were open on Sunday. most things were closed. But
yeah, I've got a little story about that. Because I ended up going to a business conference, and I was there on Pioneer Day, and I quickly learned that everything was closed.
yeah, it's fun. You go to Salt Lake, which is a major city, and even the major city, it's like dead on Sunday, which is kind of an interesting thing if you're used to being able to do stuff on Sunday. But this was back in the late 80s, early 90s, and they had opened an Arby's in Logan by the mall. And the mall was closed on Sunday, but for some reason, Arby's, because of corporate, was open. And this individual was in high school and worked there. And they had to take turns working on Sundays. And it was usually just dead to the world. I think they were mentioning that in the whole day, you might get one or two people. And they'd shown up to work and were working in the back, and there was a ding up front that lets them know somebody had come in. And there was two of them working, and this individual went up to the front counter to help who it was, and was very surprised to walk up front. And here's a gentleman, really big gentleman, full long red beard, in a complete Viking outfit. And wow. Yeah, which is really strange to begin with. And they mentioned how authentic it looked to them, like just how authentic this Viking outfit looked like. And back then, you know, nowadays you actually see a lot of authentic stuff. You have the Renaissance fairs, which we don't even have those now in Cache Valley. And you have people who do cosplay and work really hard on it. But this was just like down to the T. And so they walked to the front and asked if they could help him. And in you know, pretty good English, he came forward and ordered a meal. And they told him how much it was. And he pulled this he found very interesting, is he pulled a leather purse off the side of his out of his bag and poured out a bunch of coins on the table that were coins from all over, different time periods, different everything. And he actually was able to pull out enough like brand new Susan B. Anthony Susan B. Anthony dollars out of there to pay for his meal. And then he didn't want the change back from it, and he scooped everything else back into his little purse, and his little leather purse, and put it back in. And then they got him his food, and he walked out. He in fact had an authentic Viking axe, which looked really sharp. And some of the things that he mentioned was it didn't look like it was a brand new outfit that he had made to go somewhere. It looked like it had been used. The leather was worn. He was kind of worn. And he walked out of the store, and the individual who was serving them thought, well, I've got to see what this guy drives. You know, what does a Viking drive? So he hurried around the corner or around the counter and went outside. But when he went out, there was nothing in the parking lot. There was the Viking was gone. Everything was gone. He walked around the building. There's no way he could have gotten in a vehicle and drove off in that time. He was just gone. And so he found that really, really strange. The entire thing was just absolutely strange. And the fact that he disappeared without any way of being able to figure out where he had gone, because the parking lot was completely empty because it was a Sunday afternoon. And I just really liked that story. It was kind of strange and out there and completely different.
I love those kind of stories because I do a show called Campfire where people call in with their stories, and we have a category for just the kind of stories that you're describing, and we call them head scratchers.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more of those than you would think, because people always think that has to be in one of those categories. Cryptid, UFO, ghost, whatever it might be. But there's that other category, kind of a catch-all, a lot of time slips, missing time, possible time travel, just weird stuff that can't be explained. Those are absolutely some of my favorites. Now, you may have already said it, but if you had to pick a favorite story here, which one would it be?
That's hard to tell. In my first book, probably the time traveler one was definitely one of my favorite ones. My second book, which just came out in September, one of my favorite ones in there was also kind of fell under the glitches of the Matrix, or time slips, or however you want to call it. It was a story in there called I Met Myself.
Doppelgangers.
That one was really interesting. It was a gentleman. He was also a student at USU. It was in springtime, around time they were taking their finals, so he rode his bike up to campus. It was a beautiful day to study on the quad up there, and he laid out his blanket and was studying his textbooks, and noticed that somebody had stopped in front of him, and he looked up expecting to see one of his friends, and he was looking directly into his own face. Standing there was just an exact copy of himself, including his bike, the clothes he was wearing. The only difference was he was wearing his Seattle Seahawks hat, and the other guy had a Seattle Seahawks hat on, but it was different colors than what the Seattle Seahawks had. Instead of the blue and green, it was red and orangish color. And he was kind of in shock that he is looking at his doppelganger, and the person, the other him, I guess, jumped on his bike and took off, and he got on his bike to try and chase him down because he wanted to know what was going on. But as the other him rounded the corner of the building, he completely disappeared, and he wasn't able to find him. So you wonder if that's not like a collision of multiverses or something strange going on there. But again, I just love those kind of stories, things that are just completely out of place or just strange, like you say, high strangeness.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is that also on the Campfire Show that we do, so many people call in with the doppelganger stories. And I was familiar with the idea of a doppelganger, but until we started that show back in 2009, I didn't know that they were that prevalent. But we get a lot of reports of that. People saying, I saw myself laughing at me, all of these things. It just really grips you. Now, I do want to mention, and you mentioned this, I was really focusing a lot on the first book, Stranger Bridgerland, but you do have Beyond Stranger Bridgerland, True Paranormal Stories from the West, Volume 2. So absolutely, folks should check that one out as well. And since we're on that topic, and we haven't talked a lot about UFOs, I will ask you about a story in that book, UFO Snowstorm. Tell us about UFO Snowstorm.
So, I interviewed this gentleman. He came to me, and him and his wife had traveled. They lived here in Cache Valley. They'd traveled to Pocatello, Idaho, which is about 40 miles, maybe more, actually about 65 miles north into Idaho, to go to a wedding. And it was in the wintertime. Actually, it was close to this time of year. And they knew there was a storm coming in, so they wanted to leave early. And so he tried to get his wife out early from the wedding, but it didn't exactly work. So they left around 9-10 o'clock from Pocatello, coming back through. And the storm hit. It was a really bad snowstorm, so they were creeping along. And just to kind of explain southern Idaho, northern Utah, you have small towns and then farmer fields, and then stretches of very little of nothing but sagebrush with gullies here or there, or little mountains here or there, and then the bigger mountains off to the east and west. And as they're traveling, they come across. He starts seeing some lights in the distance, and at first he thinks it's a snowplow. It's got to be a snowplow. And as they get closer, they realize it's off the road. And he thought, well, maybe it's a car that's gone off. I'm, not sure. And so they pull up to where it is, and there's a gully, just to their right. And in the middle of the gully is hovering a UFO. It's your classic silver round shape UFO with lights on it. And he was just fascinated by it. He wanted to get out and go see if he could get a closer look, but his wife was extremely afraid, and talked him into finally driving off and leaving it. He said it almost seemed like it was hunkering down in this gully to avoid the storm or something of that nature that was going on. And so they left, again, creeping further home, and just couldn't get this out of his head. He just kept thinking, what could this be? It was so strange. It was hovering above the ground. He got a really good look at it. It was snowing pretty hard, so it had to be within, less than 100 yards from the road. When they did get home, the interesting thing was they expected to be home around 2 o'clock. But when they got home, it was closer to 5 o'clock. So they had like 2.5 hours difference where they kind of lost time. They didn't know where they had been for those. It shouldn't have taken that extra 2 hours, but they kind of attributed it to the storm. But even with the storm, he said, I don't know how we could have lost a whole 2 hours. So I mentioned to him when he said that some people who have experiences like that are missing time because they were taken by whoever was on the ship. But he was adamant that didn't happen and didn't want to go. I think he was hoping that didn't happen and didn't want to get into that part of it. But I found that just a really interesting, fascinating story, in the middle of a snowstorm to see a UFO like that.
Well, just a cornucopia of great stories. If you are interested in true supernatural stories, and I bet you are because you're listening to this podcast, be sure to check out Stranger Bridgerland and Beyond Stranger Bridgerland. And John Olsen's been our guest today. John, where can people find the books and also find out more information about everything you do?
So the books are on Amazon. You can get hard copies there or actually Kindle versions on there as well. I also have a website. It's just strangerbridgerland.com. You can look that up. It has information about me and about my books, and then a section there to contact me if you want to, and just talk to me about the books or anything that you want to. So, and I also have Stranger Bridgerland on Facebook. Those are the best ways to get a hold of me and check out the books.
Very good. We've been talking about Stranger Bridgerland. Our guest has been John Olsen. Thank you for joining us, John, and being a part of the show and sharing these spooky stories.
Thanks so much, Jim. I appreciate you being on your show. I love your shows. You're doing just an awesome job. Thank you.
Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with John. Fascinating stuff. And Bridget was a delight at the beginning of the show. So we had a fun doubleheader. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So you can keep track of everything I do. I hope you'll go to jimharold.com and sign up for my Harold's Happenings newsletter. It costs you $0 and you can keep plugged into everything we do. There's many shows that we do, and it's just hard to get that all across on the programs, or else it become a big plug fest. So we want to respect you while you're listening to the shows and give you the opportunity to keep updated on all that stuff very easily in your inbox with Harold's Happenings, which comes out every Sunday. So I hope you'll check that out. Go to jimharold.com to do so. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you next time on the Paranormal Podcast. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and jimharold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to jimharold.com, and thanks for listening.